Hello, Facebook. This is Charlie from Red Blue Talk. My channel is all about how politics and government impact people's lives. I'm delighted that you're here tonight, and we have a lot to talk about. The main purpose of tonight's show is to talk about Governor Cuomo's executive order related to reinventing and modernizing police strategies and programs. I've got several guests coming in here, and let me cut over right now to my dear friend Damon Jones. How are you?
How you doing?
All right.
How you
You look good. You sound good. You know, as I said, it's hard to be the host and the engineer, but sometimes that's what
uh,
it takes.
exactly,
I know you. I
exactly.
know you've been there. So, Damon, you've been in the news quite a bit lately. You got a lot of good press. You like a local celebrity. You're in LoHUD this week.
Yes,
You and AJ are the publishers of Black Westchester magazine.
yes.
And they did a story. What's his name? Mark Landrello wrote a story in LoHUD about sort of
Great story.
the history of Black Westchester, and you guys are really kicking it.
No, big shout out to Mark, man. That was a great that was a great story, man. We're humbled by the coverage. We're humbled by the quotes from people that we have dealt with over the years. And you know, big shout out to AJ for being the editor and making that content pop, and we're glad to be a help. Some people give them a voice. And that's what the paper was all about. Letting people have a voice.
So, quick plug while we're on the topic of Black Westchester. Sunday
Mhm.
nights at 6 p.m., you guys do a live stream,
Yes,
and there's always something to talk about.
absolutely.
And I've been a guest host on there a number of times, for which I'm greatly appreciative. Um,
Thank you for coming.
Tell us, how, just in 100 words or less, what is People Before Politics all about?
People before politics is just raw conversation. Addressing real issues in the communities throughout Westchester, New York State. We talk about national news, international news. Um, Trying to give people information. Information is power. So we try to bring different people on to discuss different topics. Whether it's politics, whether it's business, whether it's economics, whether it's mentoring. Discussion with our youth, local people. If they have any problems, they come on so people can know about the issues that they have. So I think it's a great venue to have, and to, of course, as we do with the paper, help people and inform people.
And the mission of Black Westchester is news and politics from a black perspective. Is that a fair
Yes,
statement?
absolutely,
All right.
absolutely.
So, just to kind of get right into it, because we have a couple of great guests waiting in the wings here, I want to frame the subject of tonight's discussion. Governor Cuomo, and I got to give you all the credit here, Damon. It was your idea to do this show, and it was a great idea. Governor Cuomo signed. Let me just get to my audio level where it needs to be. It should be better. Okay, Governor Cuomo signed an executive order recently. It's called the Executive Order to Reinvent and Modernize Police Strategies and Programs. So, you have a law enforcement background. You can kind of explain a little bit about that. And this initiative on the part of the governor, executive order really is the right noun to use. It says here the New York State Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative requires local police agencies to develop a plan based on community input. Police forces must adopt a plan by April 1st, 2021 to be eligible for future state funding. Tell me what you think is going on there, Damon.
Well, well, if we've been watching the news for the last 10 years, um, the institution of policing need, need needs oversight. So with the unfortunate death
Tell me what you think
of
is going
George Floyd, and I think it took I think it took um, I think it took the whole world to come to a standstill for 8 minutes and 45 seconds and watch a man die at the hands of police for them to react in the way that was needed for elected officials and leaders to actually act on legislation and laws. I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, and organizations I have belonged to, this is nothing new. This is what we've been saying for a long time, that we need to look at policies, procedures, and training, and how these policies and procedures can build uh, for and communities.
You've been talking about these issues for years. You
Yes.
you said straight up, a lot of what's happening here is in response to the George Floyd death and the gruesome 8.5 minute episode where the guy had a police's knee in his back, which basically suffocated him to death. And you have a lot of cities on fire. So I guess an opening question is a 2-page executive order. Is it right-minded? Is it too little, too late? Where do you, how do you reconcile it?
Well, I mean, I mean, it's right on time. I mean, I think sometimes um, God has to put things in motion, for actual change, and I think it's right on time. I think the riots and the protests, not just in America but across the world, um, call politicians to act. I think sometimes this is not. I mean, we're not going to. We're recreating the institution, but we're not. These are not new ideas. You had Barack Obama's 21st century policing model, but what was the problem with that? They didn't have no power for to change. What Governor Cuomo is doing with this executive order, he is attaching funding to it. If you do not um, submit your reform and what your reform will be in your police department, you will not get funding. That's something that we've been saying for a long time. You have to attach something to it in order for these police departments to change, because you're talking about um, in a lot of police departments, you're talking about embedded uh, racism and bias, and we can't say that it's not there. We had one mayor in White Plains said that there was no racism in his police department, and the whole crowd chuckled because the police department is a reflection of society. If there's racism
Did
and
you say that
bias,
was White Plains, Damon?
yes, yes. And then we have their officers calling Mr. Chamberlain an N-word before they killed him. So um, we understand this. That's not true. And we also understand that the history of policing in America was built around the enforcement of the slave codes and the black codes in the South. So the DNA of policing is the oppression of black people and people of color, and then compounded with laws and legislations over the years that have allowed police to violate people's rights.
You have a very unique vantage point, Damon, because you're on multiple sides of this thing. You are in law enforcement. You're African American, male, civilian. I guess you're not a civilian once you're in law enforcement, but you have a perspective as a writer, as a speaker, a community activist that I think is rounded in a way that many people are not able to see. So you're able to see the law enforcement side of this thing in a way that others can't. How do you reconcile, some of the energy around the contemporary discussion of police reform? Do you sort of understand where it's coming from, or
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I, I'm a black man before I'm a police officer, right? So when I've been racially profiled. You know, I've been disrespected by police. To the point that I have, and it's sad that I have to pull out my badge, to say that I'm one of you guys, right? To get some type of respect, because they don't see that I'm a police officer when I'm driving through Queens and I have a nice car and they run my plate and it's from Westchester, and this black guy is driving a car from Westchester, right? So these are the things that happen to black officers all the time. In New York, um, black cop, plain clothes or off duty, have been shot at, or killed 110 times by white uniform cops. And it has never happened in the reverse, where a black uniform cop will mistakenly shoot a white cop. And you can also pull up Governor Patterson's New York State Police on Police task force, which came after the death of Christopher Ridley in White Plains.
Yeah.
And one of the main findings of that report is that racial bias, conscious and unconscious, plays a role in a police officer's decision in shooting a suspect. But black law enforcement, we already knew that. Like, that was nothing new from that report, but that validated what a lot of black law enforcement organizations throughout the country have been saying.
Do you think that this executive order is doing enough, Damon? I spoke with an attorney who I consult with on a lot of these public interest matters. He's a former federal prosecutor, happens to be African American, and what he said to me is it's non-legally binding. Prosecutors won't even consider it. You can't use it in a criminal case. You could use the fact that there's an executive order. It might be raised in a civil action potentially, but not in a criminal one. I guess my question is, do you think it has teeth? Damon, you able to hear me? Not getting sound here. Damon, are you able to hear me? We're having an audio problem. All right, I think we lost Damon, but I'm hoping that he'll come back in. Can you guys hear me? You guys can't hear me. Let's try that again. Can you guys hear me? All right, Damon's back. Damon's back. Can everybody hear everybody right now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, well, that was a very clumsy transition to the second part of this show, Damon. But we're here. I want to introduce everybody so that everybody knows everybody. On your screen, bottom left, is the mayor of the village of Pelham, my friend Chance Mullen. And in the top right, my daughter, Ella Stern. And let me tie the thread that brings us all together here today. Damon has a law enforcement background and has a lot to say about this executive order that Governor Cuomo has issued, indicating that each municipality needs to come up with its own committee to make recommendations on reforming the police. Chance, you have formed such a committee in the village of Pelham, and Ella, you are a member of the committee which Chance has formed.
That's right.
Have I got it all correct so far? Ella,
That's right.
Can you hear us? We can't hear you. Let me make sure something's going wacko here. Chance, you can still hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Damon, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. So, Ella, you got to get your microphone working, and then we'll have it all together. Chance, tell us a little bit about your particular committee and the linkage, because I know it's not a direct line, but the linkage to this executive order.
Yeah. So thanks for having me, Charlie. So over the summer, a number of residents came out to our our downtown park. There were nightly vigils. Um, there were marches and rallies. There was an art exhibit. And overwhelmingly, for an extended period of time, people were calling for a renewed focus, not just on systemic racism broadly in America, um, but also right here in Pelham. And people said, listen, eh, we're not immune to all of the stuff that is happening everywhere else in America. And so early on, I started talking to a few people about how we could engage around the issue. And then the governor put out his order, which in many ways gave us a foundation upon which to build a formal way of doing this work. And at the time, I reached out to some of the folks who had been involved in organizing those marches and rallies and the vigils. I reached out to two of the POC-led organizations in town, Bridges of Pelham and Pelham United, folks who I knew
Right.
were associated.
Time out 1 second.
Yeah.
So not everybody's familiar with Pelham and Mount Vernon and these local communities the way that we all
Sure.
are. So Mayor Chance Mullen is the mayor of the village of Pelham. That is a different place from the village of Pelham Manor.
Yes.
And there were a number of, I guess, community initiatives, including a big, I don't know what you call it, protest march, peace march, demonstration that happened in Pelham, which is an extraordinary thing. It's a small, bucolic, wealthy white suburb for the most part. And yet here we are in, what was it, July timeframe, June timeframe? That happened?
Yeah, around then. I think it was in June. Yeah.
So it was in June, probably a couple of weeks, into the national activity on this subject. And, where a sleepy little park that was loaded with 500-600 people all kneeling for George Floyd.
Yeah.
Right. So that energy is ultimately what led to you forming this committee, finding some new people in the community to talk about these kinds of issues. Ella, can you speak? Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Yeah, now we got you. So Ella, tell us how you got involved with this committee.
Well, I guess I had been part of the committee that helped to organize the march, Pelham United, with my sister and a bunch of other kids sort of around my age in Pelham. And then Mayor Mullen reached out to me. We worked together before, and so he just asked my perspective and if I wanted to be on the board, and I said yes.
So this is interesting to me, not only because, I live in Pelham and this is my place, but because I think that this is a microcosm of what the governor wants to see happen all over New York State. Damon, is this a model? Is this what should be happening?
Well, I mean, it's a start. I'm, for full disclosure, I'm a police reform committee, George Lattimore's police reform committee. So, but here's the problem. The county's going to do one. All 43 municipalities are going to do one, right? And we're going to be right back to where we started, where police departments are going to have different policies for this and different policies for that. What needs to really happen? The state and the governor needs to get off his high horse and put a committee together and put standards. We have New York State minimum standards and a lot of them, but we should be on a level of national police standards throughout New York State. Westchester County, my last check in Korea, which is the organization that gives national accreditation, there's only one police department that has national accreditation, and that's Scarsdale Police Department. Every police department should have national accreditation. I do know it's a monetary issue with a lot of small municipalities to go through the process. It takes a lot of money, but I think we need to get away with the New York State minimum standard and be on the national level.
And tell me what that accreditation brings us. Does it bring us standardization of legislation? Does it bring us standardization of practices? Will it outlaw chokeholds in places where it's not outlawed. What will that do, Damon?
It'll bring you on the national level as far as your policies, procedures, and training, and your use of force training, and your use of force policies, and even equipment has to be at a certain at a certain standard. So I think a lot of police departments don't do it, like I said, because it costs a lot of money. So when you have these people come in and they do the audit and they found this is wrong, and you got the wrong type of siren, and you got the wrong type of this, and the wrong type of that, and the wrong type of this, it costs money. They give like 6 months to a year after they do the audit to come back to see that you corrected those problems. And I know people in Miami-Dade had national accreditation. When they lost their accreditation, the company came down like the feds. They had to take off the stickers, take off your patches, take off everything. So it's a very serious process. Even in correction, we have national accreditation through the American Correctional Association, and it's the same process. They come in, they go through everything, right? And I mean, I was amazed that the creditors that came sat and actually ate the food, to see if the food was at a certain standard, if it was warm, if the trays were clean. Like all these things go into when you apply the national accreditation.
So there's a lot of technical componentry to
Yes.
to police forces. I understand that, but the big picture, what's driving this, is that there's, I guess if I'm Governor Cuomo, why do I do something like this? I do something like this because there's a broad concern in the community that there are bad cops and there are bad procedures, and that it can be very dangerous. And I've spoken to a lot of people, and there are many people, particularly African American people, who perceive the police very differently than white people. And that unreality is what I think that they're trying to drive at here. Mayor Mullen, has there been any response from the local police force on the governor's executive order or to reaction to your committee?
Yeah, actually, everybody supports it. We have a benefit here in the village that we've tried to lean into, which is that most of our officers live here, or they, all but one graduated from our high school. So we have this benefit in that we can sit at a table as neighbors. We don't have that kind of wall between the executive branch and the people being policed, and it's been a really powerful opportunity. I have to say I agree with you, Damon. I know that this is going to be a powerful experience for Pelham, for the village of Pelham, but I do fear that the people showing up to this conversation are not always the ones who need it the most. Mm-hmm. And I think the order is broad enough. Look, it's a good order. It's a start, and it requires a process, and there's some teeth behind it, and I think that a lot of communities will get better as a result of it. But it's broad enough that you can get by without doing what we're doing, and you can find ways to kind of check some boxes, and then, go on your merry way.
So case in point, now a minute ago I mentioned that Village of Pelham Manor and the village of Pelham are two different places. I did that because I was teeing up a question.
Oh boy!
Because the Village of Pelham Manor, it's not really a question for Mayor Mullen, because Village of Pelham Manor is a different place. Apparently, the Village of Pelham Manor has not convened one of these committees. Now, there may be other communities that choose to basically look the other way and not bother with the instructions of the governor, but I think that in of itself is almost like it's a report that speaks louder than words. I don't know what to say.
Not every. I don't think every municipality will do it, but that's what Then what is the consequences, and what is the oversight for that?
Well, and also, Damon, what are the implications?
Right.
There's nothing to see here, folks. That's the implication.
Right.
right?
But exactly. But that goes back to what I was saying. I really think the state should have did their due diligence. We shouldn't have to wait. Yeah, I mean, New York State. I mean, the history of New York State and unjust police killings. You know, it should have been done a long time ago. And how do we coordinate 43 municipalities in Westchester County that some of them have continuum of force policies, some of
Mhm.
them don't. Some of them do this, and some of them don't. So, are we going to go back to that because the certain municipalities, because they didn't have an issue with something, that they're not going to change it just because they didn't have issues with it in their community?
Damon,
You know,
they all
yeah.
have issues. They all
No,
have
no,
issues,
no.
and I'll tell you
Right.
why. Well, let me tell
I
you
know
why I say.
that.
Well, let me tell you why I say that. I say that because the governor says that. He says, "quote The protests taking place throughout the nation and in communities across New York in response to the murder of George Floyd illustrate the loss of community confidence in our local police agencies." Loss of community confidence. That's not a small matter. That's not, we didn't have decals in the right location. That is, people are scared when they get pulled over and the red lights are in their rear view mirror. That's a
Well,
very serious problem.
certain people are scared. Not everybody's scared, right? So let's be clear on that.
Yep.
Like there's a certain population that's scared. Not everybody's scared. So if you're living in a community that has 3% black people, the majority of the people are really not scared, right? The majority
Right.
of people don't experience of that community what the 3%, and sometimes depending on the financial structure of that community, maybe that 3% black don't feel that it even matters to them, right? Until they have their wake up call. So the whole thing is that I believe in the process, but I still think that the state needs to do more. That Governor Cuomo is really tap dancing around this issue because we've been screaming for change. Black law enforcement. I've been 30 years, right? And even before 30 years, black law enforcement organizations in New York State have been screaming for more accountability and change. Governor Cuomo, let's not forget, Governor Cuomo was the New York State Attorney General.
Right.
He knows good and well of the issues of police oversight, right? When we met, when myself, Redmond Richardson, Al Sharpton, and others met with him to investigate the shooting of Detective Ridley, he did not do it. So he knows well of the issues.
So he was the
So
AG when Ridley was shot?
yes, he
Yeah.
was. Yes, he was. So for him to put it back on the communities, I think it's a start, but I really think the state needs to step in. Now, what will they do once they get all these packets of police reform? Is is there going to be a state panel to go over all these packets? I mean, and then we got to wait what, another year for them to go through all these police department, police reform packets. It should just straight come from the state. This is what we want. This is what we're going to have. This is the use of force policy, and this is the type of accountability. So, I mean, let I'm for it. I just want to see what's going to happen.
So Ella, let me turn this over to you because so much of the energy around these initiatives is coming from young people. What are those conversations like? I know you've had a couple of meetings with Chance, with other people in that group. What are some of the stories people are sharing? Because I've been in the background when some of those calls are going on, and I've heard some interesting stuff. Can you share some of it with me?
Well, I think a lot of, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think a lot of what people talk about are their like very personal experiences with police officers, but most of the time it ties into just a more systemic issue. And that's what this is. It goes a lot deeper than just one person being pulled over one time. Like I think it was mentioned before, the police force was started as a way to gather up runaway slaves, and I'm sure it's changed since then, but it's not necessarily something that I think a couple of reforms can fix because they have been reforms. Like banning of chokeholds and things like that, and it hasn't stopped police officers. So I think like the discourse among my generation is just that like we have seen other generations try to fix this, and it just kind of is like hitting a wall every time. So I think like to answer your question before, I think the governor's executive order is definitely a step in the right direction because at least people want to talk about it. And I think that's why it's very commendable that Mayor Mullen put the committee together because, like you said, the manor is basically in so many ways basically saying this isn't a problem we have to deal with, which I think is a slap in the face to any Black person who's ever been in the manor. So, yeah.
So, Ella, you've done a little bit of research on this because you're also a journalist, in addition to being a journalism student. Were you telling me that you made some calls into Pelham Manor, or was that your sister? I'm getting a little confused.
I didn't do anything.
It wasn't you. Okay. Did you write? Did you write about this for the Pelham Examiner?
No.
Okay. I'm mixing up kids. Well, so what are the top 2 or 3 recommendations do you think this committee is going to come up with at the end of the day?
I think that's hard to say. I think it will take a lot of different forms. I think maybe there will be some efforts of like community policing that we will propose. Perhaps like working with communities nearby is something we talk about a lot. And then also just like building relationships with the police force in Pelham that exists now. I think is a huge part of the committee. Like the police chief and a few officers have come to several meetings now and just talked about like different things going on in the police force, which has definitely been I don't know if eye-opening is the right word, but inviting to see. A lot of times you just don't know what police are doing, and I think it was nice to see.
Let me ask you a question. What are they doing?
Well, in Pelham, like when they walk through their annual budget is not the right word, like but annual report. It's a lot of like standard operations, I would say. People making U-turns on Fifth Ave or Wolf's Lane. There's like hasn't been a murder in a very long time in Pelham. You know what I mean? So it's not a particularly high crime area.
And
Yeah.
yet there's a lot of cops, right? And I heard people on some of these calls talking about their direct experiences with the police, and they were not all glowing. So, what do you think, Chance?
I think that I don't want to make news tonight with our stuff because I want the group to be able to make the recommendations. But there already, I know that there are going to be some things that, frankly, when we started, I didn't know how we could recommend that and get away with it. As strange as that sounds.
It does sound strange. I don't know what you mean.
So things like body cameras.
Okay.
That's the kind of thing that people are often very difficult, have a hard time engaging in that conversation without feeling like you're just, policing cops. And we've had a very good conversation about it, and our police chief is in favor of it. And that's the kind of conversation that I didn't entirely anticipate. And I know that we have a good police chief, and he's been, there are many policies that he's implemented that, frankly, our use of force policy is, we do have the force continuum. We have the New York State model policy.
Yeah.
So I knew he was up to the challenge. But being able to see it and realize that there's actually a lot of will in the room that people lose through the political debates.
Yeah, okay. I can see that.
And I think the other thing that I would just say is that I think this group is operating from a standpoint of, at least the people in the room are saying, look, we all want the same thing. And the thing that some communities don't understand is, if people that you are policing don't trust you, you can't do a good job. You're not going to be able to do it. And I think that commitment to building trust and being willing to engage in conversations that sort of without defensiveness, and really being able to sit down and say, okay, this is impacting you. How do we fix it? That's what we've tried to center, and I think it's going to help.
So it sounds like Village of Pelham, on some level, is absolutely trying to deal with it, trying to address these questions, and grappling with it. But it's a well organized, well funded police force, properly staffed, presumably
Right.
reasonably well trained, and then it's a kind of an organized place with a very fairly low crime rate. Not all police forces have all of those benefits. Damon, there's a community right next door that we're both very familiar with, Mount Vernon, New York, where there may be a different set of issues, and if you're in a place that has financial distress and much more complicated social issues, the police may have other problems. I've heard that there are police cars in Mount Vernon that have north of 100,000 miles and are 7 or 8 years old. There are police that have to pay for parts of their own, I want to say armor. I may not be using the exact right words. Parts of their own, part of their own uniforms. So there's a different set of pressures and a different set of issues in each community. So to some extent, I think that it makes sense that the governor wants a local flair on this. But ultimately, if what we're trying to do here is bring back a degree of confidence that's been absent, I think it's, to your point, Damon, it's only one of many things that needs to happen.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I think Mayor Mullen's ahead of the game when he has the majority of all of his officers actually living in the community that they police. That is real community policing, right? So we got away with that. Police actually living in the community. I grew up in Greenburgh. I went to Woodlands High School, and my dad's club football coaches from 4th grade to 9th grade were two brothers that were Greenburgh police officers. And when you have officers living in your community, they are investors and stakeholders in the community.
That's very key.
They're just not coming in, doing a job, and going upstate, right? They're actually investors, and if they're living in the community, they won't bust little Michael in the head real quick, because because that cop went to high school with little Michael's mother or father,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's a different relationship with the police and the community. So I mean, those are the things that must be addressed in other communities. And how do you get your local law enforcement to actually live in the community that they serve? And part of the problem, and where we got away with that, when I was coming up, they used to have officer friendly and the officer next door program, and we got away with that because of police unions, right? They were opposed to officers living in the community. The Federation of Police put out memos on that. That they were against officers living in the community, and that did a big disservice to the relationship between law enforcement and the community served. And I just want to add, a lot of the criminal justice practitioners and those who claim that they in law enforcement follows the Robert Peelian principles of law enforcement.
What's that, Damon?
What it is, Robert Peel is the originator of law enforcement in England, right? And and they give this lie that policing came from England. No, it was developed around the enforcement of the slave codes and the black codes. But if we want to take that notion, right, that law enforcement came from England and Robert Peel, and we look at the 9 principles, right, of policing, right? One of the number 2 is real key. It says the ability of the police to perform their duties is dependent the upon public approval.
Bingo.
Confidence.
That's it. That's it. Right. And and you know, and then at number three, it says police must secure the willing cooperation of the public in voluntary observance of the law and able to secure and maintain the respect of the public. So if we are using Robert Peel's principles when it comes to all these issues that we're talking about right now, a lot of police departments are far away from that. And the culture of the culture of policing of itself, with the blue wall of silence, the no stitching in the police department, goes directly against Robert Peel's principles.
We could do a whole nother show about what's going on in Mount Vernon right now. It's been on NPR. I was in the car yesterday. They were talking about Mount Vernon for a half an hour, about the whole story about the police who recorded other police. And I mean, talk about a confidence meltdown. I mean, there are questions about whether or not some of the prosecutions are even going to hold up as a result of the district attorney having known about this. It's a mess. It's another show. Sunday nights at 6:00. I guarantee you'll be talking about that this week.
Well, we had a show today. We actually had the reporter today. You can probably go on one of the pages. We had the reporter George Joseph, who broke the story of the police tapes. I think this is like his third, and he just when we were doing the interview of him, they dropped another story about Governor Cuomo ignoring the call.
I saw that. I saw that story
of elected officials and ignoring calls of organizations in actually investigating Mount Vernon Police Department because of the historic issues that they have with the community. And in full disclosure, also, my wife is a detective in Mount Vernon Police Department, so I've known firsthand. And I know a lot of the cops that are on the tapes, and it's very disturbing because as black officers we have to be extra, and Mount Vernon is a police department that is majority black and have a black commissioner and the majority of black leadership. Like you don't see black lieutenants and black captains in a lot of other police departments in Westchester County. So when we hear about this in the black law enforcement community, we are outraged because we work hard to build that relationship between law enforcement and the community of color and the poor community. So we want to set a standard in a certain professionalism, because if we're not addressing these issues and pushing back against that, it's going to be very hard for us to get young black and brown people and young people to take these tests. Mm-hmm. Because more and more you see less people wanting to be police officers from communities of color because of the negative relationship that it is. So we have to have accountability and transparency, and some type of integrity, so young people will want to take the test.
Absolutely, because you need black people in those jobs, because that's just an important part of every local economy. So look, I want to kind of wind this up a little bit here. The governor is trying to aim in the right direction with this thing. He's got something called the Say Their Name agenda. There have been some recent reforms with the help of the state legislature, including allowing for transparency of prior disciplinary records of law enforcement officers by reforming the 50A, Article 50A of the Civil Rights Law, banning chokeholds by law enforcement officers, prohibiting false race-based 9/11 reports, and making them a crime, and designating the Attorney General as an independent prosecutor for matters relating to the deaths of unarmed civilians caused by law enforcement. So there's the legislature, there's the governor, there's what happens in these local communities like Chance and Ella are trying to do something about. It's going to take, a giant bear hug around everybody to build the confidence that is going to be necessary for policing in the 21st century. Are there any final thoughts, Damon?
Well, I think the state legislators are still missing the mark. What we have suggested as a national law enforcement organization, that whether it's on the state or federal, that there should be some type of police criminality law, because it's this simple, right? Law enforcement, myself, and other law enforcement officers, we are paid by the taxpayer. Everything we get comes from the taxpayer. Our benefits, our salaries come from the taxpayer, and we get a certificate from the state. Right? We go through the academy. We get a certificate. We're peace officers of the state of New York. And when we go into our communities and we violate our policies, procedures, and training, it should be a crime. Shouldn't be no less than a crime. If we are found guilty of violating policies, procedures, and training that leads to serious injury or death, it should be some type of a crime. Because we are the trained professionals, and we took an oath. Every law enforcement officer takes an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of New York and the Constitution of the United States, and then we go out there and we shoot an unarmed man.
But isn't that a foundational change, Damon? Because up till now, that concept of immunity applied to the police. So I'm not moralizing whether you're right or wrong. I'm
Right.
saying how foundational a change it would be to criminalize malbehavior by the police.
Well,
It's big. It's big.
Right, but if I'm a civilian and you're standing there with your hands up and I shoot you, that's a crime. That's if
Right.
you're a civilian, you're going to get arrested for it.
Right.
So why not a law enforcement officer if he shoots a guy with his hands standing up, right?
Right.
So I mean it should not be any. Law enforcement is the only profession that have the right to take somebody's life. That we could use deadly force. And if we do that in violation of the departmental policies and their procedures, and if we're not trained to do that,
Right.
it really should be a crime.
Well, something's got to happen because we're seeing these heartbreaking cases. I'm losing audio here from you guys. One of you's got a microphone plugged in or something. Something weird is happening. Huh. Alrighty. I think everybody can hear me, but they can't hear you. Can you speak?
Hello.
Ella, you're okay? Yeah, I don't
Yes.
know. What's
Hello?
going- Yep, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're back. Weird stuff happens on live streams, right, Damon? Every Sunday night at 6. When is there not something?
Absolutely.
Look, what I was trying to say is something foundational needs to change because people are saying they're looking at these videotapes and now everybody believes that there's a problem. And it's an absolutely heartbreaking thing when a guy says, I can't breathe, and a bunch of husky cops wrestle him to the ground and he dies of suffocation. I mean, where are we living? This can't happen. It's irreconcilable, and that's what all of this talk and all of this activity and all this energy is being aimed. And I thank you all for coming on here to talk about
Thank
it.
you.
Listen,
Thank
I
you.
want to give because it wouldn't be a live stream without a naked plug. Sunday nights at 6 p.m. People Before Politics. Listen to Damon and AJ. They have great politicians come on there and other people and talk about politics, education, culture, you name it. They're talking about it Sunday nights at 6 o'clock.
Yes.
Facebook, go to Black Westchester on Facebook and you will find it there. Ella Stern, journalist, student, daughter.
I don't get paid for my journalism, so.
But you still write and you still think you impart knowledge to other people, and that's
right.
That's journalism. Pelham Examiner, let's put in a word. That's a local newspaper that's run by students.
Great.
Chance Mullen, mayor of the village of Pelham, trying to make a difference, trying to be responsive to the will of the people and the governor. Thank you for coming on this show. Any final words, Chance?
I think my final word would be to other mayors and just say, you don't have to have the answers at the start of the process. I didn't come into this going, oh, I know what I'm going to do. You just have to show up. And I hope that other mayors throughout New York State will just show up for the conversation, because a lot of the answers, if you're willing to listen, you'll find the answers.
Well, thank you. Ella, take us out from the vantage point of youth. Tell us, what do you do if you're a young person? How can you get involved?
Well, I was gonna say the thing you were talking about before, qualified immunity. I don't know if you that kind of was what you're describing in terms of it makes it very hard to sue a police officer when they do something that's against the law.
Yep.
So that needs to end. And I think for young people, you have to register to vote. You have to be informed. It's really easy to not care, but I also think you'll have to care to an extent, because this is our generation that is responsible in a couple of years. So I don't know, read the newspaper, watch TV, register to vote, and just help in any way you can.
Excellent. I think that pretty much puts a point on it, right, Damon?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. It's a good place to stop.
Absolutely.
Hey, thank you, Ella. Thank you, Chance. Thank you, Damon, for being my guest. This is Red Blue Talk. My channel's all about how politics and government impact people's lives. We've been talking about police reform and what goes on in local communities. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, or Thursdays, I try to publish something new every single week. Facebook.com/RedBlueTalk, RedBlueTalk.com. It's on Twitter. It's on Facebook. Thanks, everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good night.